Occulture show. I'm your co-host, Lilith Dorsey, and that's my other co-host on either side, whatever.
I'm Jason Winslade. Today we are here to talk about Dune, the quintessential pop occulture property, franchise, set of books, movies, and all kinds of things. So it is March still, and the movie, the second part of the Denis Villeneuve epic, has come out in theaters. I saw it on the big screen. You haven't seen it yet, but we know the story
No,
for the
yeah.
most part. But we're going to talk about all things Dune and their occult connections today. I was feeling psychedelic. I got my psychedelic Dr. Strange shirt, and there's this whole kind of connection between psychedelia and Dune. And it's interesting that this more recent adaptation sort of eschews most of that, to make it more modern. Whereas, of course, the original Dune is middle of the 60s and was a huge part of the counterculture in the 60s. And so there's a lot of psychedelic elements in the history of its readings and adaptations. So we're going to talk about that, especially our sort of favorite version that exists only in our imaginations, the Jodorowsky version of Dune, that might have been, and we'll talk about that as well. When we think of the classic Joseph Campbell hero's journey, right, as in terms of how it's applied to modern literature, not Greek myths or anything that he based it on, but
Sure.
modern literature and modern culture, what do we think of? We think of Star Wars. We think of, Luke
Sure.
Skywalker. We think of Harry Potter. We think of
Right.
Atreides. And of all of those characters, Paul Atreides is the one where, the whole point of the books is that, which a lot of people don't get because all they've seen are those movies, is that Paul is the hero, sure, but not for long. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
the whole
Definitely.
thing of how we wait long enough, the hero becomes the villain. Well, yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. Is that the whole, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but the books are a warning about what happens when we create a messiah, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I was looking at one academic article by Paul Kucera that said Dune was the study of the perils and seductions of absolutes, which I just love that. Like,
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, there we go. There's so much in in the books and the films that are showing us there's this way or this way, but that's not the way, right? Like, and that to me is where the occult side of it comes
yeah,
in an overarching narrative.
yeah. So the book was published in 65, the first book, right? So you know Herbert's right in the middle of it, and he's at the forefront of an environmental movement, and so obviously, the environment is a huge part of what's going on, and people have made all kinds of there's been all kinds of speculation about what spice represents. It's oil, or it's pharmaceuticals, or it's whatever, but it's that thing that the culture as a whole is addicted to, that leads them to exploit and oppress.
I mean, have you even seen this? I've seen a couple of people even suggest that Arrakis is supposed to be Iraq. Like,
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. Like I mean it's phonetically it could be a thing. I'm not sure if that was his intent, but could be. Well, the thing is
well,
that
it's supposed to all be based on early Sanskrit. That's what I came up with, which I
right.
thought was interesting. And
Well,
too.
Herbert himself was a Zen Buddhist. So the whole thing that's interesting in the books is that they've just from a religious standpoint, right? That the Fremen culture is this strange combination of Buddhism and Islam. So there's like Zen Sunnis and Zen Shiites, um, and and the Imperium, the what eventually becomes, well, by the time of Dune it is, but you see the origins of it in the prequels. But the Dune, the Imperium's like main religion is based on something called the Orange Catholic Bible. And the Orange Catholic Bible is interesting because it's a bunch of guys decided to take all of the religions of old Earth and throw them all together into this one amalgamated thing,
Okay.
and then that would become the text. But in the prequels, when the Orange Catholic Bible first comes out, it causes chaos. There are riots. There are jihads that come out of this. There are, thousands and thousands of people die protesting this Orange Catholic Bible. Whatever 10,000 years before the main Dune stuff. So by the time we get to the Dune in the present of the Atreides, that's been accepted. So already there's this whole thing in there just in terms of religion, of what the mainstream religion is and what the religion of the marginalized is, which is this Zen Sunni thing, which becomes the Fremen religion, right? So that's the overlay of it. But then we've got the Bene Gesserit and the Missionaria Protectiva, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute. But
Right.
so I mean, let's talk about other occult stuff. You want to so the Bene Gesserit itself, the Order of Priestesses. If you haven't read these books or seen the movies, you might be a little lost, but we'll do our best.
Yeah,
So
this is very Dooney.
right. The Bene Gesserit, of course, are the order of women who have been trained in all kinds of things, from martial arts to uh, reading languages and
What, I got a list here. I got
okay.
martial arts, feminine diplomacy, espionage, sex, lie detection, and mind control. All the things.
And breeding, of course.
Oh yes, breeding. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's not lost on me that they even refer to them as witches in the books,
right.
a couple of times, so there's a very clear occult statement in my mind that these are people that I guess other witches should identify with, or could
Right.
identify.
And they're witches with political power, which is unique, I think, in a lot of ways. That they are.
I think it's coming out of the time, though. You know what I mean? Like, you're talking about 65. I'm thinking about those, early protesting witches in the 70s, like Margot Adler and whatnot, that really would go with these signs out onto City Hall and everything in New York City. So I think there is a component to witchcraft, especially in the midst of that counterculture 60s that was.
Right. I mean, you're thinking of also the WITCH,
yes,
the Women's International Conspiracy from Hell or something. Where they protested at University of Chicago, and there was all of that. But in that case, I mean, that's where it starts. In that case, they are the counterculture. They are the marginalized. In Dune, they are the power. They are the and they are embedded in the Imperium, with nobles, with the Emperor, with all the different houses. And you see in the movie there's political machinations where they're playing them off each other,
Oh, sure.
because their goal, their mission is very different from the Imperium's. It's very different from any of the great houses. They want that thing that they don't want. And that's part of the whole Dune story, right? Is that they are trying to create a Messiah that they can control, but it happens too soon and out of their control because Jessica loves Leto.
Yep, that's it.
Because of one woman's love for a man, the entire plan is screwed because of this. And so, just to explain this thing about the Missionaria Protectiva, which is interesting from a cultural, religious, and occult standpoint, right? Is that their whole their whole thing is to create religious propaganda by seeding stories and myths into these cultures so that when their person comes along, they are ready for them. The cultures are ready for them. So the idea is that in Dune, on Arrakis, they have had these missionaries who have laid the foundation so that when Paul comes to Arrakis, he is the Lisan al-Gaib, the voice from the outside. So there's this whole propaganda thing.
Well, the thing that strikes me the most about the Bene Gesserit is the voice, right? I was reading this Robert L. Mack article called Voice Lessons, The Seductive Appeal of Vocal Control in Frank Herbert's Dune. He talks about how it's all these things, right? It's both feminine and motherly. It's this union of both self and other. And I think that definitely gets portrayed in pretty much, well, the first one anyway, that of this particular films that we're discussing. And I think that that's the key for me. Magically, that's the key, that like the fact that they can put it in someone else's head. It's almost some sort of advanced level of neurolinguistic programming. And to talk about what I was mentioning before about the prescience of the whole thing and whatnot, I think there's a way in which we've gone from the witches being these protesters in the time of Frank Herbert and when we were kids and everything like that, to, okay, what happens if we carry it into the future, thousands of years? Then where are we at? We do have witches with political control, and we do have witches with mind control, and they're at the core of what's happening. It makes perfect sense to me.
That's so interesting if you think about projecting, our brand of paganism thousands of years into the future.
Yeah.
and where we would be, I mean, because I think there's a lot of thought that people would think, well, that we'll be persecuted, or we'll die out or whatever. But what if the opposite
Right.
happens, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
What if we're already seeing a lot of the witchcraft community leaders writing their own history, but like, what if we wrote our own history into something that was advantageous to us?
Yeah, I mean, part of the thing too is that goes along with the Bene Gesserit and the power, and especially with that voice, is that they are, the priestesses who have passed the test and have become full-fledged priestesses have all of the voices of all of the other priestesses who have ever existed in their head at once. And in the books, like some women can't handle it and they go crazy. But the ones who are the most powerful are the ones who are able to channel those inner voices. And that, I think that's the implication, is that the voice is so powerful because it is a union of all of those past voices speaking together. And what power, right? If you think of speaking with the voice of all of your ancestors in a really
Right.
specific, clear lineage, what
Yes.
power would you have if you had that kind of unification with your ancestors?
I think that's where the story's going. I think that's clearly it. And it's the wisdom and the voice and the knowledge of all the ancestors, but also this thing about when it goes into your mind, it's in your voice, right? Like, so it's like you can bestow that power onto somebody else, or you can bestow those thoughts and consequently those actions onto somebody else for the desired result. So that to me is some of the best magic in the book, hands down.
Yeah, I mean, there's like this notion that well, yeah, they have all of the wisdom and of their ancestors, but they also have all of the craziness too, because there's some really
Sure.
messed up people in that
Yeah,
ancestral line, right?
of
Um,
course.
but even with all of that, even with all of that prescience that comes from that ancestral line, they still mess up. They still predict wrong, and
Yeah.
the Kwisatz Haderach, their Messiah, comes early, so to speak, and yeah, their whole thing about eugenics, um, trying to create that perfect, um, you know, the perfect model of humanity. And that's another thing that I think um, people have connected to occult history.
Sure.
And I was looking at this I was looking at that was this article that was written by Jules Evans, his Philosophy for Life website, Dune, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and Occult Eugenics. And he goes through a lot of now there's some controversy around this. I don't think everyone agrees on the specific agendas of Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and the Golden Dawn and Crowley and all that. But there are strong arguments to be made that they did support a kind of occult eugenics, that they were
Sure.
not only were they trying to improve the mind of man, um, and train their initiates to get to this higher level, and that with each successive wave of initiates they would get closer to this. But there's also, with people like Yeats, people think of Yeats as being like, he's the Irish Celtic revival guy, and all those lovely poems and everything. But Yeats was a bit of a I won't use the N word, the other N word. But he was kind of they were monarchists. They weren't
Yeah.
Golden Dawn folks were not lefties at all. They were
Yeah.
conservative.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, Yeats had kind of a thing about, it was almost his version of the master race. And when you look at a lot of the foundational occult texts, they were reading some of the same things that Himmel and Hitler were reading, but they drew different conclusions from them. But yet
Yeah.
there's still this notion that Yeats thought that there could be this superior race of magicians. And
Right.
it wasn't so much about ethnicity, although there's some of that, but it was more about um their abilities, and that way that they could then use those abilities to be our elite leaders. And Crowley has some of that too, although he's less about the eugenics and more about the training, because the whole magical child thing, and the child, the Horus, the Eye of Horus, I'm sorry, Age of Horus thing. That's the son of Isis and Osiris, and that we're building towards that magical child with an E thing going on. So there's a lot of that in 19th century, late 19th, early 20th century occultism. And some speculate that Herbert was drawing from that history when he created this. So yeah, that's another occult connection there, with what Herbert was trying to do. But again, we talk about how he predicts how propaganda would work. I mean, propaganda was already a thing, obviously, by that point.
Right.
But
Right.
I mean, like in terms of, he lived through the war, but just in terms of the insidiousness of it in the future, but also economic control, political control. I mean, a lot of people, say that he predicted Trump, right? That the
Yeah.
Harkonnens were kind of, and when you look at the images in the Villeneuve version that show a kind of, on Giedi Prime, that show that sort of, the soldiers in formation, and the vast structures, and a lot of stuff, and we'll talk about this, that comes from Hodorowski, but just that kind of space fascism, um, that's very clearly the kind of vibe that people like Trump are into and want, and are striving to achieve. So, but yet the person that's going to save us from that isn't a good guy either.
No, no, he's not. Can I
So
take a moment to talk about spice?
yes, be a Spice Girl.
Right?
Tell us what
I'm
you
gonna be the
want, what you
spice
really,
girl.
really want.
I want to talk about spice. I love the fact that it operates both as a trap and a tool, right? Like it's a drug, obviously, and we see that very clearly in the film and the books, but it's also we need it to get from one place to another. So to just bring it back for a moment to the whole psychedelic thing, I just love this concept of it's something that we can use as a drug, but it also gets us to our necessities, right? Like the origins of psychedelics as being a psychiatric tool used by the government and things like that to help heal this madness. So we've got this thing in the book that operates on two levels and is obviously referencing this, history of these things in the past that Herbert would have been very familiar with. So I find that fascinating, and I love the way their eyes go blue. I just
Right, right. I mean, spices, it's a culinary thing. They add it to food.
right,
It's a life extender.
yeah,
It allows the mentats to do their calculations more. And it allows the navigators to navigate. So
yes,
and that's really the main thing is that it's the foundation for space travel. What's interesting in the prequels is that when they first discover spice as a thing and start to export it, it's actually there was this huge plague that the machines released onto all the human worlds as a way to sort of cull the population. And this giant and this was published in, I want to say, 2008 or so. I'm blanking on when the Butlerian Jihad trilogy was published. Um, so it predicts global and transglobal pandemic, right? And spice is one of the few things that helps people survive. So the spice is also kind of like vaccines, right?
wow,
That thing that is a good, but yet then becomes manipulated and controlled. So,
mm-hmm.
there are big pharma equivalents in the Imperium, right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I love this.
So yeah, it's both this amazing thing that causes literal human evolution. But yeah, it's also the foundation for political power manipulation and oppression. So there's
Which again, we've seen historically, right? We've seen that happen historically with opium trades and everything like that. Like it's a big business, and
I
big
mean,
pharma is still a big business.
and so again, the birth of Dune and the franchise is smack dab in the psychedelic era. So they would have seen spice as primarily a psychedelic thing. And so that's one of the things, again, I think that Herbert was trying to um, warn people about was, that allure of psychedelics is great and it can evolve the human race, but watch out.
Yeah, beware, beware. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, he was
yeah,
warning, I think he was warning culture about
yeah.
psychedelics at that time, right?
Yeah,
Now,
I think so.
but yeah, I mean, these films are they are a particular vision of Dune that are based on epic Hollywood in the sense that you're seeing this larger than life epic on screen, and it's all about the spectacle and the visual. And I think the story is solid. It's just never going to be able to reach the depths that a longer adaptation might have been able to do, like the Sci-Fi Channel thing. And also, Villeneuve does tend to distill it, which is good, I think, for storytelling purposes, but it leaves out a lot. Like there is no, there's no weirding way. It's funny because Lynch went
Right.
the opposite direction and took the weirding way and turned it into the whole Muad'Dib thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
not in the books, but the weirding way which is basically, it's meant to be this prana spiritual thing that the Fremen and the Bene Gesserit knew, that they could make it seem like their bodies were moving faster than the eye could see. And you see that effect in Lynch and the sci-fi thing. That's not in the Villeneuve movie at all. So that occult aspect isn't there in that adaptation, which is a shame. But I get that he wanted to ground it in more reality, that these were just really good and determined fighters, that they didn't have some superpower. So there's that. So yeah, it's great that these movies are out and they're putting more attention on, and people are talking about the books more again, as they usually do. But also people realizing how nuts some of those later books were. I mean, they are a part of our, they are a consummate part of our culture, of our occulture,
Sure.
of our pop
Yeah.
culture. And yeah, I don't think we could call ourselves a pop occulture show without covering it in some way, shape, or form. But we'll see what the future is of the franchise, of the books, because ultimately, I mean, how many prequels can they do? I don't know.
Well,
But
never
yeah,
underestimate.
right.
If it
But I
makes
think,
money, they're going to keep going and going.
yeah, I mean, we wouldn't have, I think, half of the properties that we have in science fiction, in books, television, and movies, if it wasn't for Dune. I mean, Dune, it
Sure.
set the stage, and certainly Star Wars would not exist without Dune. It would have been a very different thing without Dune. And of course, we could go on and on about those comparisons, but that's been done in a million podcasts.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's our Dune show. Please tell us what you think, and add your comments. We really do like to have dialogue with our watchers, our listeners. And we love the fact that last week we had Albert Sharp's great granddaughter,
Yes.
Darby O'Gill,
Yeah.
his great granddaughter chimed in and said, "Hey, this is great." So please, leave comments on our YouTube, follow us on Patreon, subscribe to Patreon, www.patreon.com/popcultureshow. And if you like what you see, subscribe. We enjoy hearing from you. We enjoy tips on our Venmo site.
Yeah. Right.
We have, I'll put that website on there too.
Yeah.
So what we
I
got
do
coming
want to
up?
say two things.
Okay.
I want to say, since we're all nerdy and I'm all blurted out, I am doing Blurred Fest here in New Orleans on May 18th. So I hope to see some people in person for that. And I have a new book coming out about tarot. And surprise, surprise, you don't even know this, Jason. I did a podcast last week all about our show with the amazing Tanya Brown.
Ooh.
And that should release probably right around when this episode is going to release.
Nice.
So we'll
Great.
put that link up there.
And when is your tarot book coming out?
In June, beginning of June.
We should
Yeah.
tarot themed shows.
Oh, that's a good idea. We could do Carnival.
Oh yeah,
that'll piss some people off. Right on.
Right. All right. So what we got coming up next show?
Like Water for Chocolate. Is that next?
Yeah. We're tackling the classic of magical realism, Like Water for Chocolate.
Yes.
Famous novel, but also film. I saw it in college. I'll be seeing it again, I'm sure, in preparation for the show, because it's been a while.
Yeah. But I love it and I'm excited. And we'd also love to hear what you want to hear us talk about.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of magical properties out there. I realize we haven't done a Firefly show yet. That'll have to happen as well.
I'm not sure how occult Firefly is, but maybe.
What? Okay.
That's a discussion, I guess.
Yeah, I'll change your mind.
But yeah, there are lots of properties out there, and I'm back doing my blog, A Cultural Context, on Patheos, so maybe some ideas will come from that too. And because there are some streaming services that I have that you don't, and some that you have that I don't. So we'll
We'll figure it out.
we'll have lots to talk about in the coming year, and eventually into season 3, whenever that happens.
Wow.
We'll have to change our logo for season 3 just for fun.
Okay.
But we'll see you next time on the Pop Occulture Show. I'm Jason Winslade. This is Lilith Dorsey. And we'll see you
Bye.
in the
Thank
ether.
you.
Bye-bye.